It's time for another installment of The Basics, and on today's show I'm going back to the X-Files CCG, and I want to talk about house rules versus tournament rules. Now, you've seen me do this for another CCG, but I want to talk about how different it is with the X-Files CCG, mainly because there's already two different games involved with this. So let me get started and show you what I'm talking about. Now, the X-Files CCG is different from other CCGs, mainly because it comes with two different sets of rules depending on the game that you want to play. Even though it's a thinking, cunning, investigative game, there are two different levels of difficulty. I am referring to the basic rule book, which is the standard game that most people play and is the standard that you see at a lot of tournaments, and then there's the advanced game. A lot harder, there's a lot more to do, a lot more thinking involved, and the games take a lot longer. It's not for everybody. Personally, I've never really bothered with the advanced rule set because it gives me a headache, and because this show is called The Basics, I stick with the basic rule book when I talk about the X-Files. But because of the way the X-Files is with two different sets of rules, it's hard to do any mashups or interchange house rules with this game, but there are several that you can do. So I'm going to show you, starting with the fact that you can use cards that aren't really available for the basic game, in the basic game, quite easily. For example, you have cards, and I'll show you with one here. Any of these cards that have that little X up in the top left corner are meant for the advanced game. You wouldn't necessarily put them in a constructed deck for the basic game. But you can if you're playing house rules, and it has been done, and back in the day when I had my first set of X-Files cards, we did that. So whereas in the normal basic game you wouldn't really use combat cards, you can insert them into the basic game in a house rules. As well as other cards with the X from different classes like Witness, Event, Equipment. You could put some of those cards with the X in the basic game as well. It actually made it a lot more fun having the combat factor and having some of these great cards that were only set up for the advanced game in the basic game. The problem is if you're adding extra cards to an X-Files deck in a mashup like this, normally you draw 6 to 7 cards. You want to maybe up that to about 8 because you're going to have about 25% more cards in your deck and you want to be able to get them out faster. Also, by doing this, one of the house rules that I used back in the day when I used to have a small group of X-Files CCG friends was that in a normal game of the X-Files you can play 3 cards per turn. We would up that to 4, maybe 5, depending on the size of the decks. And 4 was a happy medium, especially when we were adding in the advanced cards. Now, you could also take facets of each, the basic game and the advanced game, and mix them together. The problem was, again, because it's a thinking, investigative game, because you're using cards from the advanced game in the basic game, it's going to drag on. So this is where a time limit in a CCG actually works. Whereas in the Star Trek CCG or Magic or Overpower, it doesn't make much sense even in house rules. Putting a time limit in the X-Files CCG when you're doing a mashup of rules actually works, because if you don't, when you're using advanced rules combined with the basics and your decks are bigger, this could be a 3-hour game. And really, it stops being fun after 2. It just drags and you want to get out of there. So have a time limit, experiment with the time limits, experiment with the, as I call them, the X-Factor cards in the basic game. And again, don't forget to use things you might already have to use as tokens, because mainly these tokens are reserved for the advanced game. But as I've mentioned on previous episodes, in the basic game you can use things like nickels or dimes or these tokens or even D&D dice to note your progress in the hospital with your agents. So there are a few small things you can do with this CCG in terms of house rules. Now, that all being said, if you're going to play using these house rules and mash up some of the advanced cards, you're going to have to rebuild that deck if you're going to be going to a tournament or playing any official rules set, because Good luck trying to sneak some of those cards past anybody in a tournament if you're playing basic rules and you have those X Factor cards in there. So again, like I said with other CCGs, build your decks wisely depending on the rules you're playing with. That's all for today. Have a great day, everybody.